Hello everyone. Welcome to this webinar, Connecting AI Agents to Financial Workflows or Connecting Your Agent to the OpenBB Workspace. First of all, I'm Michael. I work at OpenBB, and one of the things we really wanted to cover today is everyone is excited about agents. Everyone is excited about how they can help them in their financial workflows. Everyone understands that agents are going to potentially be this big thing. And we've spent a lot of time at OpenBB thinking about this. And not only do we have our own OpenBB Copilot that comes as part of OpenBB Workspace, a lot of people are familiar with that, but what they don't know is we actually allow you to bring your own AI agent to OpenBB Workspace that can do all of the analysis that you needed to do that's specific to you. So today we're going to talk a little bit about how we see agents working with OpenBB Workspace, and then also actually a live demo where you're going to not necessarily code along with me, but watch me implement a agent that we will add to OpenBB Workspace and connect to this. And we've got a bunch of open source code that we'll share with you and all of that at the end. But without further ado, let's get started. So if you're not familiar with what OpenBB is, OpenBB Workspace is this really powerful platform that allows you to bring in all kinds of data. And data takes the form of widgets. You have multiple different dashboards. We've recently launched apps, so you can actually build apps on top of OpenBB Workspace. And what we also have is we have this really tight integration with our built-in agent, OpenBB Copilot, that can do a whole bunch of interesting things. It can share reasoning steps. It can produce charts. It can produce tables. It can do financial analysis. It can look at structured data. It can look at unstructured data. And this is kind of what we believe the future of financial analysis with AI is going to be. So if you didn't know about OpenBB Workspace, this is kind of what it is, and this will just set the stage for what we're going to build, which is a custom agent that will slot right in and have access to some of these widgets and some of this data. So long story short, it's an extremely capable platform. You can have all kinds of different data come in and out, whether it's PDFs, CSVs, images, unstructured text, maybe it's normal structured data that gets returned by an API. We really believe in being this unifying centerpiece that allows you to bring in your own data, no matter whether it lives on your network, on your computer, on the internet somewhere. So we want you to be able to bring in your own data. We now allow you to write your own apps that incorporate all of these various pieces of data. And we want to allow you to bring your own agent. And that's the thing we're really going to focus on today, is this bringing your own agent part. All of these other things are true too, and we're going to leverage that. But basically what we're going to focus on today is bringing your own agent to OpenBB Workspace. So at OpenBB, we think a little bit differently to maybe what you've been seeing elsewhere on social media with regards to AI. And we have our own guiding principles that the AI team has used in order to build things related to AI at OpenBB. So our guiding principles are, the first one is that human and AI is superior to human or AI. We don't want to see humans replaced by AI. We actually have a vision where a human plus an AI is going to be a lot more effective than replacing a human with an AI. And we really believe in combining, the thought process of a human with the amazing analysis capabilities of an AI. And we actually think this symbiotic relationship is more powerful than one operating independently or the other operating independently. The other guiding principle that we have is with OpenBB Workspace, anything the human can do, whether it's manipulate the interface, look at certain pieces of data, that kind of thing, the AI must be able to do as well. So if a human can change input arguments and fetch certain kinds of data, our AI needs to be able to do the same thing, and vice versa. We never want the AI to be able to do something, fetch some data, set some arguments, stuff like that, the human also won't be able to do afterwards. The data should flow freely into an AI system. So what we mean by this is it shouldn't be hard for me to integrate the data into OpenBB Workspace. If I bring in that data as a custom endpoint that we hit and then produce a widget from, the AI should have access to that data automatically. So there's none of this, I integrate into the front end and then I've got to integrate into the agent. We don't believe in that. We say we've got this amazing platform. If we integrate it once, the AI should just have access to that without having to know anything else that's special when it comes to accessing that data. And we're targeting the financial industry. So this is kind of how we're approaching AI at OpenBB. And we rely quite heavily on the magic of the browser to do this. And we have a unique architecture that allows us to be this universal multi-plug that allows you to plug in both any data that you want, but also any agent that you want. So OpenBB Workspace runs as a local first web app. So everything you see runs in your browser. We don't have a backend that fetches your data or anything like that. We actually hit the data endpoints directly from the browser. So only the client code is distributed by the web, but there is no data that flows through our backend system at all. And the main benefit of this, or one of the big benefits, specifically if you're in enterprise, is we have really excellent security. You have to be on the same network as where the data is available. If you're not, you just won't have access to it. And this is also great from a development point of view or from a privacy point of view, if this is something you feel strongly about, because you can serve data from localhost. Because everything in your browser does all the magic, you don't have to have your data, which maybe you care quite a lot about protecting, that doesn't have to be publicly accessible by our servers. It all flows through your browser. And so even if you have an agent running on localhost or your data running on your machine, you can connect it to OpenBB Workspace and it will work. So this is what the architecture kind of looks like. So here, a human can be interacting with the browser, either on your machine or on your network. You have a custom data backend, which you can connect to OpenBB Workspace, and it comes in the form of a widget. This is the way we map data sources into UI elements that you can interact with. And the same thing applies to an agent. The agent can either be running on your machine or your network, and it will interact with the browser and then get access to all of this data. So the way that works is a little bit special, and it's why I'm going to spend a little bit of time explaining how this works. So basically, if you're in OpenBB Workspace and you submit a message, let's say, to your agent, it talks or interacts with the browser using this agent protocol. So what will happen, for example, if we want to fetch data from these widgets that live in the browser, you will submit a message. This will then send a list of messages and the widget descriptions to your custom agent. The agent will then submit a function call, and we have this little function call handler that lives inside of the browser that goes and fetches the data for you on behalf of your agent and then sends it back to your agent. So all of this magic happens through the browser. The agent doesn't do some kind of magical network request that has to hit your backend. It uses one interface and specifies which widget it wants to access and with which input arguments. And then the front end has this little handler that takes care of it for you. And this agent protocol is what we've actually published as an open source library that not only we use for OpenBB Copilot, but that you can use for your own agents. And we'll speak about all of that later. So the idea is you integrate the data once into OpenBB Workspace, and then the AI gets access without you having to do anything special. So your data basically not only becomes visible to humans, but by making it visible to the humans, you make it accessible by the agents. And this is a really strong competitive advantage that we have. And it's also nice. It makes it easier for you as a developer because your data team that's responsible for integrating the widgets, they can do that. And your LLM or agent team, they can work separately and it'll just work. So a little bit more about the agent protocol, which is what we use to communicate with all agents at OpenBB Workspace. It is a stateless protocol, so we don't expect you to handle what the message history is or anything like that. The front end does all of that for you. And so every single time you get a query request, you get all of the messages, previous messages that have been sent, all of the previous context, all of that. It's also a REST API, which is something, if you're technical and used to developing stuff, you should be familiar with. You stream back function calls, citations, tables, messages using server-sent events, which is the typical standard for LLM frameworks and LLM service providers. And then obviously, like I mentioned earlier, our SDK is completely open source so that you can easily migrate or build from scratch your own agents on OpenBB Workspace. So this is where that code lives. You can just search for OpenBB AI. It should come up on Google. This is where we have our SDK that allows you to bring whichever agent you have to OpenBB Workspace. And it actually has a really, really simple interface. We have all of these little helpers that you basically yield from. So for example, the message chunk, if you yield this, this is how you send and stream messages back to OpenBB Workspace. You can send reasoning steps, which is something that basically informs the user of what your agent is up to before you're ready to stream back the result. You can fetch widget data, return citations, return tables, return charts. All of that is available there and documented on that repo. And so the only thing you really need to do if you want to be able to convert your existing agent to work with OpenBB Workspace is from this SDK, which is pip installable. You just need to import the query request and accept this as your input. And you need to write an execution loop. And from that, you just need to yield these from these helper functions as an SSE. And that's it. That's all you have to do. And suddenly you now have access to, you now have brought your agent to OpenBB Workspace. And also at the bottom here, we have a link. So we also have a separate repository that contains a whole bunch of example agents that show you how you can do this, which you can just copy, paste, and run on your own machine to get up and running quickly. And then if you wanted to do something like fetch data from the OpenBB Workspace and use that, very simple. All you have to do is create a widget request that you then yield from, where you specify the widget and the input arguments, and then we will create a follow-up request that contains that information. So all of the complicated stuff is basically handled for you. You just have to get used to a couple of pieces of boilerplate. But once you implement that, you have a running agent that works with OpenBB Workspace. And again, you can just take a look at this link for some of the examples on how this works. But we're also going to live code one of these, so don't worry too much. So you have two types of function calls, basically, with OpenBB. You have the locally executed function calls, which is something you might be familiar with already if you're used to building agents that can do function calling. But then we also have remotely executed function calls. And this is what we get from this get widget data function. And this is used for fetching data from the browser, essentially. And like I mentioned, the separation of concerns makes building agents much easier. You don't need to worry about, how do I fetch data and format it correctly for my agent from this API and this API and this API, because they're all different. All you have to do is bring them to OpenBB Workspace as a widget, and then everything else just falls into place. What's great about this is this means that no matter your framework, no matter your API, no matter what you're doing, it's very unopinionated. This will work whether you're using Anthropic, Gemini, OpenAI, LangChain, Magentic, whatever you choose. Your agents don't need to manage any of the state, which makes implementing and debugging and reasoning about the stuff a lot easier. They don't need to understand anything about how to fetch data from APIs. You just need to understand how to fetch data from widgets, and then to be able to parse the responses and make these function calls. So to bring your own agent and make it compatible is actually really easy, which is something we're quite happy with. Then also, this is kind of like our vision, right? So you have your browser, you bring in your data, and you have your various agents, and the integration is done via the browser. So you don't have to worry about connecting these together. Just work through the browser with OpenBB Workspace and it's taken care of for you. So that being said, that's a little bit of an information overload. Let's talk about what we're going to do, because once I start writing code, I think this will make a lot more sense. So the demo that I want to do today is to integrate an FOMC agent that will be able to analyze some of their minutes and some of their reports based on some criteria that the FOMC themselves have set out and experimented with. So we're going to implement a variant of one of the articles that they put out called Using Generative AI Models to Understand FOMC Monetary Policy Discussions. Long story short, basically what the FOMC did is they did some experimentations with LLMs to analyze FOMC minutes, where you extract the relevant information according to these 7 key topics that they chose. And what we're going to do in addition to that is not just extract and categorize these pieces of information that are relevant, we're also going to rate their sentiment, whether they're positive, neutral, or negative, and also explain why they got that rating. So we're going to take what the FOMC published here and we're going to take it one step further. And doing this is less than 100 lines of Python. So just a quick architecture refresh of what we're going to do. We have an FOMC app that provides a PDF widget that allows us to browse all of the PDFs that the FOMC has published. And then we're going to spend most of our time writing this agent that will integrate as a custom agent that will be able to access this data and then do this kind of analysis. So just to explain our workflow, the front end is going to send by the front end, I mean the OpenBB Workspace is going to send a completion request to our agent. We're going to take that. It will contain some description of what the widgets are. We're going to fetch the PDFs from the OpenBB workspace by submitting a function call. Then we're going to add the PDFs to context in a way that will work for our LLM provider. We're going to be using Gemini. And then we will be sending this prompt and context to Gemini, and then we'll be streaming the answer back to OpenBB Workspace. But we're going to do this step by step. So if this is too much in one go, don't stress. And so what we're going to have is this, basically. So here is the FOMC document view that's provided by the app. And here is our agent. And you can see, basically, based on this PDF, we're going to categorize the various sentences according to their category. We're going to give a sentiment rating, and then we're going to give an explanation. And then we're also going to have these reasoning steps that explain what we did along the way. Okay, so with that out the way, I'm just going to quickly switch screens, and then we'll get started. So what I've got here is just the code. I'll go through this in a second, but before, I just want to talk a little bit about our custom agent SDK, which is what we'll be using. So again, you can just Google in order to find this. It's available at the OpenBB AI repository. You can pip install it, and then you can build your own agents. The documentation is here where we show you, how the query request works, the message chunks, everything. So this is kind of where you should stop and take a look. And then, of course, we have a example agents repository as well, which will show you, how to build example agents. So what does a custom agent consist of when it comes to OpenBB Workspace? Basically, there are two main points that you need to implement. The first is a query endpoint. So the query endpoint is basically where all of your custom agent logic lives. This is where you'll be handling widgets, handling the messages, making the requests to your LLM provider, that kind of thing. So this is where we'll be spending most of our time. And the other thing that you need is an agents.json endpoint. This is just a little bit of boilerplate that tells OpenBB Workspace how it should interact with your widget, with your agent, and what name it should give it, what description it has, what features are enabled, that kind of thing. So we're not going to spend too much time on this. We're mainly going to focus on the query endpoint, but just know that this is something that you need. All right, so let's turn to the code. So inside here, you can see here is our agents.json endpoint. You can see we have an FOMC agent. We've given it a name, a description, and we've turned on some features. And then here we have some example code living inside of our query endpoint. So like I said earlier, I'll be using Gemini. You can use OpenAI, you can use Anthropic, you can use OpenRouter if that's something that you care about. It's completely up to you. In this case, I just happen to be using Gemini because they have a nice way of handling base64 encoded PDFs. But that's basically it. So what do we have? We create a client and we have a config with a system prompt, which I'll go into in a second. This is just something that you need to do for Gemini. And then for Gemini as well, what we now do is we loop through our request, this query request object, which is what you have to accept as input. And then you see if we have a human message, we then prepare this for the Gemini API as a user message. If we have an AI message, we do the same thing as a model message. So this is where we're passing the input that comes from OpenBB Workspace, and we just map it into the right format that the Gemini API needs. Then we create our stream, and right now we just print it out. So we don't even have any kind of chat or interaction with OpenBB Workspace. So I'll show you how this works. I'm just going to run this agent, and I'll come to OpenBB Workspace, and I'm going to use the FOMC Documents app. So here we can see this is the widget. I'll just make this a little bit smaller. This is the widget. It allows us to look at things like minutes or monetary policy documents, that kind of thing. So this is the data that we'll be using. And to add my agent, I just come here, I say add copilot, and I just add my locally running copilot over here. So here we see we've added our FOMC agent. And just to show you how this works, I'm just going to submit a message. I'm going to say hi. So we see nothing got streamed back yet. But if we take a look at my terminal output over here, you see we're printing out the stream. We say, hello, I'm ready to help you analyze FOMC documents. Please provide me with a document you'd like me to review. So we've got a working agent, sort of, but it's not quite fully integrated into the front end. So let's figure out how to do that. So the first thing we've got to do is we've got to yield service sent events. I'm using Fast API as our framework of choice, which a lot of you will be familiar with. So the way you do that is by returning an event source response that accepts a generator, and the generator must yield service sent events. If that sounded like a lot to you, don't worry. I'll go through it slowly. So what we need to do is we need to return this event source response. And what this needs to take as input is some kind of function that we like to call the execution loop that will be yielding service sent events. So let's quickly write this function. In this case, it has to be a asynchronous generator. So we define it using async def in Python land. And I'm just going to move all of this underneath here. Right. Now, the last thing we need to do, I've imported already, but it's from the OpenBB AI library. We need to yield from this message chunk. So just a reminder, if we take a look over here in this message chunk, this is how we create a message chunk service sent event that streams back results to OpenBB Workspace. So we've already got it imported. Let's just yield. So instead of printing, we'll just yield a message chunk and we'll yield this text. Now, this is quite important because the event source response depends on you actually yielding dictionaries, not pedantic objects from this. So this message chunk helper, if I just show you the definition, this is a pedantic model. You have to do a model dump. We are looking at ways of improving this, but it's just something you need to remember if you're using an event source response. So let's try, now that we've added our execution loop and we've now added a way of yielding these message chunks back, let's just rerun this again. So I'm just going to rerun the high and let's see what happens. So there you go. That's all you needed to do. Now we have a chatting interface where this works with OpenBB Workspace. So for example, I'm good, thanks. Tell me a finance joke. So OpenBB, or not OpenBB, but the FOMC agent and Gemini in particular isn't super funny, but here we go. So all we had to do is we had to wrap our logic in some kind of async generator, and we just needed to yield from one of our helpers. Now we've got a chatting interface. That's all it took. So now we've got a conversation. Before I go on with the PDF and bringing in the PDF and how we analyze that and all of that stuff, let's take a look at our system prompt. So I've written the system prompt already. It's not too long, but basically we're saying you are a helpful financial assistant working on behalf of the Federal Reserve to make policy documents more easily accessible to the public and analysts. So when presented with an FOMC document and asked either to analyze or summarize, your goal is to categorize each piece of information or text extract into one of the following categories and provide a sentiment for each text extract. And so we just give an example of this. So you see, we're looking at real activity, labor markets, inflation, financial stability, financial development, the Fed funds rate, and the balance sheet. And we have a couple of instructions like give a 100-word summary, etc. So that's all the system prompt is, right? It's just extracted. It's basically copy and pasted the examples from that FOMC document that we spoke about earlier, and we're just asking the agent to do the same thing. Okay, so now we've got the chat working. The next step is how do we access this information and bring it in? So we've got two parts we need to solve. The first is we need to be able to parse, ingest, fetch this information from this data from OpenBB Workspace, and then we need to be able to format it and parse it so we can send it off to the Gemini API. So let's start with the first part. We're going to connect, we're going to teach this agent to fetch data from a widget. So how does that work? Well, remember this request object, this query request object. It's got a whole bunch of attributes. It's got messages, which is what we're currently parsing over here when we loop through them and format the messages for the Gemini API. But it's also got this widgets field. And this widgets field will contain all of the descriptions of this widget. So I'll show you how that actually looks in practice. So I'm running this agent in a debugger. If that's unfamiliar for you, don't worry. All a debugger basically allows me to do is to pause and poke around a little bit in the internals of my program as it's running. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause. I'm going to put a breakpoint and pause here, and I'll show you what the widgets look like inside of this request, and then we'll start from there. So I'm going to add this to context, and I'm going to choose this document, and I'm just going to say hi again. Okay, so we've stopped right here, but we've accepted this request. So let me go into my debug console. I'll just show you the messages first. So you can see we only have one message, and that's this message of me saying hi. But if I inspect the widgets attribute, you'll see, oh, I have quite a lot of information. So I have a primary widget. We actually prioritize widgets. Basically, a priority widget is one that you see added down here. You can read the documentation about how that works. But let's actually take a look. So if I go to request.widgets.primary, we take a look at the only one that we have, which is this FOMC one, we see it has a UUID, it has a ID, it has a name, it has a description, and it has all of these parameters with current values and things like that. So with OpenBB, if you want to access the data of this widget, it doesn't get sent through to you automatically. You have to fetch it from the front end. So let's do that now. So what we're going to say is, let's do this here. If we have a request that has widgets, and we have primary widgets, and we're going to do something special. We're going to say that the most recent message is a human message because, in effect, we're hiding a little bit of this away, but what's happening is there's going to be a function call message that gets sent to the front end and a function call result that gets sent back. We want to make sure that we don't get stuck in a loop where we're constantly fetching data. So only if the most recent message is human, we then need to yield from this get widget data helper. Now, this takes in a widget request or a list of widget requests. And I'll show you what these consist of now. So a widget request consists of a widget, which is what we're looking at here, that gets passed into the request, and then also its input arguments. So because we could have multiple widgets, let's go through this slowly. I'm going to say for widget in request.widgets.primary. Let's create a widget request where the widget is the widget and the input arguments. We're going to just reuse the currently selected input arguments. So you can actually take a look at these here. If I go to my debugger and I go params, you can see here is the year parameter, right? Which is currently set to 2025. And we can see that matches over here. And if I look at the second parameter, you can see here's the document type parameter. You can choose from monetary policy, minutes, etc., etc. And as we can see, let's see what the current value is. The current value is monetary policy, which is what we have set here. So the reason we don't just send you the data is like what happens with OpenBB Copilot. We actually select the input arguments based on your query. But in this case, that's a little bit out of scope and too complicated. So the only thing we'll do is we're just going to reuse the currently set input arguments as they are. All right, so we've got the widget request, and we're just going to append it to our list, and then we're going to pass in the widget requests. Now, one thing that's really important is when you are fetching widget data, you need to close the connection. This is because of the following. So the way all of this works is a query gets submitted, then you submit a function call and close the connection, and then a follow-up query gets sent from the OpenBB Workspace that contains all of the messages and the function call result. So it's just something that important to remember that when you fetch data from the workspace, you need to also close the connection. And we can do that by submitting this return over here. So let's try now. I'm going to run my agent again. And let's see if we actually were able to fetch that data. So I'm going to pause the execution over here. And this happens really quickly, so you won't actually see it happening, but we'll go through it slowly. So I'm going to say hi. All right, let's take a look at our messages now. So you can see our first message is just the human message. But then because we yielded this get widget event, we've got another message, which you can see is a function call for the get widget data function. So this is what the function handler in the front end takes care of. And then if we take a look at the next message, we say, oh, wow, we have all of this PDF binary data essentially that's been sent through to us. So what we've done is we've done this part. We've sent through the query, we yielded the function call, we've now fetched the data, and now we need to format it in the right way so that we can send it to the Gemini API. So let's do that now. So the thing to take a note of, if you take a look at this last message, right, is it's got a tool role. So we can use that in order to handle it correctly. So if the message role is tool, and we're going to do one other thing here, which is quite important. So because remember we said the agent is stateless, we send through all of the function calls at a time. I'm only going to make sure that we attach the most recent data rather than all of the data that's ever been sent. So let's do that by just doing this. So we're going to enumerate through these, and we're just going to say if it's the last message, then we'll handle this. So now I'll just show you what you need to do for Gemini, but depending on the agent or framework that you're using, you'll handle this in different ways. So right now, this is just a Gemini specific way of parsing PDFs to the LLM. So for data in our message and for items in data.items, so we just have a special format or special data structure that you follow through for tool messages. The reason it's nested like this is because you can send through both multiple pieces of data or retrieve multiple pieces of data from multiple widgets in a single function call. So we have to split things up. But for now, just understand this is how you traverse it. And then all we do is we just parse in the data, this data that you see here, all of this binary data. We just add that to the PDF parts, and then we send that through to Gemini. So you can just see over here, we just extend the parts because the way Gemini works is that actually each message has a bunch of different parts. Some of them can be text, some of them can be binary, some of them can be video images. And this is the way you just add PDF binary parts, and then we just extend them from the most recent human message. Okay, so let's run this again. And let's see, fingers crossed this works. So let's go back here. We've added our one PDF as context, and I'm going to say, hi there, please analyze this document. Let's see what happens. All right, so here we see a short summary, and just give it a second, it's just busy streaming. There we go. So we've now analyzed this document. And now we have a summary, and now we have each piece of text. We basically have a categorization for it. So for example, the extracted piece of text is economic activities continue to expand at a solid pace. This is under the real activity category. We've given it the agent has given it a positive sentiment, and it's explained why. And so that's basically what lives inside this document. And we can see there's a whole bunch of them across the board, right? So some are neutral, some are positive. I'm sure there'll be a few negative ones as well. I am using, just for the sake of speed, I'm actually using Gemini Flash. But in the example code that we'll make available, you can use the Gemini Pro and actually turn thinking on. And then you'll be able to get a much more comprehensive response. It just takes a little bit of time to run while it's doing the thinking. But there we are in what is, let's see, 59, 118, and what is 60 lines of Python, give or take, of business logic, and maybe another 10 lines of boilerplate. We've basically taken an agent that could just print out text to the terminal. We've given it the ability to fetch data from the front end, and then through a system prompt actually do analysis of a PDF. And even with me explaining, this has taken us maybe 20 minutes of code. So that's basically it. That's how hard it is if you want to do something like this. So I really recommend checking out both this repository and also our examples. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and then we can basically open the floor for questions and comments. So basically, thank you everyone for joining. So we are OpenBB. If this is something that you're interested in, please get in touch with us at hello@openbb.finance. You can go take a look at openbb.co. We actually have a generous free tier, which includes the AI, and it actually allows you to bring your own data, build or use the apps, and build and bring your own agent, or you can use ours. All of this is available on the free tier. And if you are interested in using this for your enterprise, we are enterprise ready. We have all of the compliance stuff we can do in deployments on-prem in your VPC. So please give us a go, start the repository, check us out. And if you're curious or interested, reach out to the team and we'd be more than happy to answer any questions that you have.